Millions of Americans wake up with Hoda Kotb for over 20 years. There was no mistaking her laughing. Her friendliness was effortless. Hoda had evolved into more than just her TV personality. Whether she was interviewing presidents, offering consolation to bereaved families, honoring common people, or just laughing wildly with her co-hosts, she was like family to a lot of viewers. That's why so many people found it so hard to comprehend what came next. Hoda's made a move that no anyone anticipated at a time when she appeared to have everything she had worked for decades. She turned to go, not because she no longer loved television, not because NBC ignored her, and not because the ratings had plummeted, because her life away from the cameras had started to demand something different from her. Hoda Kotb made the decision to quit one of the most prominent roles in American morning television, a very personal tale of parenting, time, fear, and the realization that no amount of career success could make up for the minutes she could never get back lay behind that choice. For many years, nobody outside of morning television could even begin to imagine Hoda's schedule. Her workday had started while most families were still asleep. While most of America was making its first cup of coffee, she frequently had to get up in the middle of the night, prepare for broadcast before daylight, research interviews, meet producers, and be camera ready. It wasn't as simple as she made it seem, and things started to shift as Hoda got older. As her 60th birthday drew near in 2024, she began to consider time in a different way than she had previously. Hoda had been a climber for the majority of her adult life. She had persevered through innumerable auditions, rejections, positions on local television, demanding schedules, and the harsh unpredictability of the news industry. She eventually rose to the top and is now one of the most recognizable faces on NBC. Most people would have hung onto their position for as long as possible after fought so hard to get there. Hoda started posing a different query to herself. If the people she cared about were growing up while she was away, what good was all that success? It became impossible to ignore the response. Hoda was no longer merely a TV personality. She had a child, Haley Joy and Hope Catherine. Her daughters had totally changed her perspective on what was important. Hoda became a mother very late in life, which only seemed to increase the value of each year spent with her kids. In 2017, she adopted Haley. Hope then became a member of the family in 2019. Hoda used to worry that she might never become a mother. She had received a breast cancer diagnosis years prior. After receiving therapy, she lived. However, the incident had a profound impact on her life that went well beyond her physical recuperation. She had already learned from cancer that she should never take the future for granted. That lesson was reinforced by motherhood. All of a sudden, mornings involved more than just watching TV. They dealt with breakfast, school, inquiries from young girls, casual talks, and minor moments that viewers of television would never witness. Eventually, there was yet another terrifying chapter. Hope had a severe medical emergency that necessitated hospitalization. Hoda took a brief break from today to attend to her daughter's medical needs. Hoda initially withheld a lot of information. The audience was aware that something was amiss. This was a time when she made the decision to shield her child from public scrutiny, even though her job required her to tell stories to millions of people every morning. Hoda later disclosed that Hope had been given a type 1 diabetes diagnosis. Their family's routine was altered by the diagnosis. Diabetes type 1 necessitates ongoing awareness. It is necessary to keep an eye on blood sugar levels. Insulin is incorporated into daily living. In addition to learning new routines, parents need to be able to see warning signals of potential problems. This was no abstract medical tale to Hoda. Behind a news desk, she was reporting. This was her young daughter. The pressures of getting up early and sticking to one of television's most demanding schedules felt different all of a sudden. Eventually, Hoda admitted that Hope's illness was a major factor in her choice to depart today. Not sporadically, not whenever the production schedule permitted, but she wanted to be there. When her girls most needed her, She wanted to be there. Viewers were shocked by that choice because Hoda was now practically indispensable. She has been cultivating ties with audiences all around the nation for years. People joined her in celebrating birthdays. They saw her experience heartbreak, fall in love, become a mother, and start over. Her personal narrative had become entwined with her television profession. Then September 2020 arrived. Sitting next to her coworkers, Hoda declared that she would be departing today. Tears were a problem for the woman who generally consoled others. Her co-workers sobbed. The audience sobbed. Beneath the sentiment was something much more significant than a TV anchor's leaving. It was the tale of a lady who came to understand the cost of achievement. Hoda had pursued possibilities for decades. TV shows resume, so she was now racing against the clock. Anchors are replaced by networks. The following morning, the cameras are activated once more. However, children only mature once, and Hoda Kotb had at last gotten to the point where she was unwilling to miss it. However, the majority of spectators were unaware that her decision to depart today was related to a much longer journey, one that was full of heartbreak, illness, rejection, and times when Hoda herself wasn't sure if the life she had imagined would ever come to be. Hoda Kotb was just a young reporter with a resume, a videotape, and an ambition long before America recognized her name. And the woman that millions of people eventually grew to love was influenced by what transpired during those formative years. She was hearing a word that could have ended everything before it started. Long before Hoda Kotb became one of the most adored faces on American television. No, Hoda had repeatedly earned a broadcast journalism degree from Virginia Tech and joined the field with the same aspiration as countless of aspiring journalists. Look for a TV station that will give her a chance. She was enthusiastic. She was trained. She thought her audition tape would help her get the job. Rather, doors continued to close. Later, Hoda talked about carrying her recording from station to station in the hopes that someone might see something about her the others had overlooked. News directors observed, interviews took place, and rejections followed, sometimes swiftly, sometimes courteously, but the response was always the same. They weren't searching for her. Those early years were everything from easy for someone who would later become famous for making television appear effortless. Imagine being young, aspirational, and certain that you had made the right career choice, only to have expert after professional tell you that you didn't belong on television. After being rejected repeatedly, disappointment might turn into something more harmful. It turns into uncertainty. Perhaps they are correct. Perhaps the dream is not feasible. Perhaps there's something you won't acknowledge that everyone else can see. Hoda had the option to stop. Rather, she continued to drive. She kept going to stations and giving people her tape until one news director finally thought she had enough potential to offer her a chance. A little television station in Greenville, Mississippi, gave her her first big break. It wasn't quite the glamorous start one might think of for a future NBC star. Celebrity interviews, a renowned Manhattan studio, and enthusiastic crowds outside Rockefeller Plaza were all absent. It mattered that Hoda was just learning the fundamentals of television. Reporters in small market journalism are required to perform nearly every task. You acquire the skill of chasing tails. You pick up working skills fast. When a live report goes awry, you find out what occurs. When there is no second opportunity, you learn how to talk organically. Above all, when the glitter is gone, you discover if you genuinely enjoy your work. From Mississippi, Hoda did. She kept advancing through regional television markets, gaining expertise, and honing the conversational style that would eventually come to define her. Before arriving in New Orleans, her profession led her to Illinois and Florida. Hoda joined WWL-TV as a reporter and anchor there. One of the pivotal locations in her career would be New Orleans. She learned something from the city that refined television studios could never impart. Reporters are not remembered just because they provide information. They recall the way those reporters make them feel. Hoda had something that was hard to produce: linkage. Instead of talking at them, she could talk to them. She was able to chuckle without coming across as practiced. Instead of hurrying to fill the silence, she could remain with someone who was in excruciating pain and let it exist. Her national career would later be defined by such attributes. However, they were being created years before the majority of Americans were aware of her identity. Then everything changed in 1998. Hoda had once drove from station to station in hopes of getting the chance to work as a correspondent for Delaney NBC at NBC News. NBC is a reputable news magazine and national television. All of a sudden, the woman who had been turned down numerous times was covering stories for millions of viewers. However, the issue persisted after joining NBC. Another type of pressure came from national television. Each interview was increasingly important. Every error was easier to see. There was fierce competition. She had to prove herself once more. She traveled, interviewed families, covered events that frequently entailed grief, survival, violence, and loss, and covered difficult topics for years. Compared to the Hoda, the audiences would eventually identify with wine glasses, laughs, talks with celebrities, and impromptu dancing. This was a completely different Hoda. She took her correspondence seriously. During some of the most agonizing times in their life, she sat across from people, perhaps without even realizing it. She was cultivating the emotional instincts that would eventually lead to audiences placing such a high level of trust in her. Hoda was skilled at asking questions, but her ability to listen was even more crucial. Then life told her a tale that she was unable to safely report. Hoda had a breast cancer diagnosis in 2007. She has interviewed people whose lives were altered by horrifying medical news for years. She was the patient now. Hoda was pushed by the diagnosis to face something much bigger than mortality or television ratings. She had both reconstructive surgery and a mastectomy. Additionally, even with a successful course of treatment, surviving cancer left mental wounds that could not be healed by going back to work. Later on, Hoda talked candidly about how hard it was to accept her body's changes. There were times when the woman who exuded confidence on TV felt completely insecure. Her notion that life could always be planned had been destroyed by cancer. However, it also provided her with something unanticipated: urgency. Hoda started living a different life. She became more open to taking chances, more willing to express her emotions, and more conscious of the possibility that waiting for the ideal moment would mean waiting indefinitely. As Hoda was recuperating from one of the most traumatic events of her life, an unforeseen television chance emerged, making that metamorphosis all the more important. Today, NBC was experimenting with an extra hour. In the end, the format would pair Hoda with Kathie Lee Gifford, another renowned television personality. The combination may not have seemed groundbreaking on paper. In actuality, it would permanently alter Hoda's career. After years of covering disasters, the sullen Datini correspondent was set to show America another side of herself: humorous, unvarnished, sentimental, sometimes chaotic, and entirely human. What followed turned Hoda from a reputable journalist into something far less common. Millions of viewers thought they knew this individual. However, her private life was heading toward heartbreak, reinvention, and a question she had silently carried for a very long time. Even as her career was finally reaching heights she had long dreamed of. Would she ever have children? Something unexpected had occurred by the time Hoda's visage became recognizable in the fourth hour of today. She was no longer viewed solely as a journalist in America. The woman behind the journalist was starting to come into view. Hoda became looser, funnier, more impulsive, and much more intimate with Kathie Lee Gifford than she had ever been throughout her time at Line. They clicked right away. They chuckled. They made fun of one another. Relationships, family, aging, awkward situations, and the peculiar truths of daily life were all topics they discussed. They wept occasionally. Sometimes their laughter was so intense that they could hardly finish a segment, and the audience adored it. But what appeared effortless on TV was actually the result of years of unconscious development on Hoda's part. Susceptibility. She was not afraid to show her flaws to the public. Hoda didn't appear interested in pretending that life was ideal in a field that is frequently fixated with gloss. She discussed disappointment. She admitted to being insecure. She revealed moments that other celebrities on television might have kept private. Most significantly, she didn't attempt to project an air of invincibility. The more Hoda shared about herself, the more viewers felt comfortable sharing their own feelings through the narrative she covered, which turned into one of her biggest assets. Beneath the laughter, however, was a lady whose private life had already been put to the test in agonizing ways. Her relationship with her own body and time itself had shifted once she was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2007. Additionally, there was an additional consequence. Treatment for cancer had an impact on opportunities she had previously believed would always be available. Being a mother became challenging. Having children is viewed by many as a milestone that will only occur at the appropriate time. That was no longer how Hoda could see it. Years went by. Her career on television flourished. Her public life expanded. However, there was still a sense of uncertainty about her future. In the meantime, she had experienced both joy and sorrow in her personal relationships. Hoda had previously been married, but the union ended in divorce. She later fell in love once more with Joel Schiffman, a financier. Before becoming public, their romance grew in secret. They created a life together for many years. Hoda appeared to be starting the chapter she had always desired from the outside: a prosperous job, a steady relationship, a house, and ultimately motherhood, something even more significant. Hoda shocked and pleased audiences with an announcement in 2017. A baby girl had been adopted by her. Haley Joy was her name. The event felt very intimate to those who had seen Hoda openly discuss life for years. When she first became a mother, she was in her 50s, a time when a lot of people are watching their kids get ready to move out. From the outset, Hoda was starting the voyage. She also didn't conceal her feelings about it. Everything appeared to change after becoming a mother. Suddenly, the woman who had spent decades measuring her life in broadcasts, assignments, interviews, and professional achievements was counting time in bottles and bedtime routines. No television prize could match the first words and small moments. The family expanded once more after 2 years. Hope Catherine, Hoda's second daughter, was adopted in 2019. The names themselves appear to convey a basic aspect of Hoda's outlook on life. Jai Haley. Hope for a woman who had experienced years of doubt about becoming a mother, cancer, divorce, and rejection. These kids stood for much more than a fresh start. They stood for potential. Hoda seemed happier than ever most of the time. Happiness, however, did not instantly make life easier. A demanding television career coexisted with motherhood in ways that people hardly think about. Morning television is cruel. Although their day starts hours earlier, the hosts grin under the studio lights at 7 in the morning. Preparation, makeup, editorial meetings, breaking news, last-minute script changes, and unplanned interviews. There are further meetings, appearances, planning sessions, and duties when the cameras stop. Hoda did it for years. She had mastered the art of splitting herself between two different universes. She was mom at home. She was one of NBC's top stars at work. Then came yet another significant shift in my career. NBC fired Matt Lauer in late 2017 after he was accused of sexual misconduct, and unexpectedly encountered one of the largest upheavals in its history today. Savannah Guthrie continued to work at the anchor desk, but the network wanted someone who could take on a very public role. Hoda did. Hoda and Savannah Guthrie were formally appointed co-anchors of Today by NBC in January 2018. It was a historic event. The show's primary morning broadcast was now permanently led by two women. For Hoda, the accomplishment was the result of decades of perseverance. One of the most sought-after positions in American broadcast journalism was now occupied by the young reporter who had previously faced numerous rejections. There was a lovely irony in the fact that she had reached the top In the same time frame, Hoda had made her greatest career breakthrough. At last, she was a mother. All of the things she had previously doubted she would ever have appear all at once. However, happiness is rarely undisturbed by life. Hoda and Joel broke up years later. They kept concentrating on raising their kids. However, the world that Hoda had previously envisioned had once more changed. It was the end of another relationship. It was necessary to reconstruct a different version of life. However, Hoda continued to show up on TV every morning with the same kindness that fans had grown accustomed to. That contributed to the captivating nature of her story. The hardships behind the smile were just as real as the grin itself. Since nothing unpleasant had occurred, she was not grinning. Despite what had transpired, she was grinning. Then, in early 2023, Hoda abruptly vanished from the modern world. Days went by. Viewers started posing queries. It became impossible to overlook her absence. The cause finally became apparent. Hope, her younger daughter, had been admitted to the hospital. Hod's meticulously balanced worlds intersected for the first time in years. The TV schedule was no longer important. The interviews were irrelevant. Her young girl needed her somewhere away from the studio lights, and the profession she had worked so hard to establish suddenly took a backseat. And Hoda was going to experience the kind of anxiety that many parents can relate to. The anxiety of not knowing if your child will be alright. Scariest moments of Hoda Kotb's life did not occur in a studio. Early in 2023, they took place in a hospital room. A change was apparent to viewers. Hoda wasn't present today. There wasn't much explanation at first. Days passed. Fans started inquiring about her whereabouts. Her absence felt sudden to someone whose visage had been a part of millions of morning rituals. When America woke up, Hoda was typically the one seated at the desk. The chair was suddenly empty, and no one appeared to know why. After that, Hoda came back with an explanation that altered many viewers' perceptions of what she had been going through. Hope, her youngest daughter, had been admitted to the hospital. Hoda had every reason not to disclose every medical detail right away. This was not a narrative for television. This was her offspring. Hoda had been interviewing parents coping with illness, bereavement, uncertainty, and terror for years. She was skilled at posing challenging queries. She was skilled at sitting next to someone whose life had been upended in the middle of the night. She was seated on the other side of that encounter now. In the hospital chair, the reporter had taken on the role of mother. Additionally, no amount of professional achievement can prepare you for the powerlessness that comes with that situation. Numerous issues can be resolved by parents. They are able to prepare food. They are able to read books before bed. They are able to shield their kids from disappointment. After a nightmare, they are able to hold hands. However, the answers suddenly belong to doctors, test results, medication, and machine numbers. When a child gets very sick, the unknown was unsettling to Hoda. Later, she conveyed her sincere appreciation to the medical staff that treated Hope. More details of the tale eventually came to light. Hope was given a type 1 diabetes diagnosis. It was not something that could be ignored. After a few days of treatment, it started to become a regular part of family life. When a person has type 1 diabetes, their body is unable to create enough insulin to control their blood sugar levels. Vigilance, monitoring, treatment, preparation, and ongoing awareness are all necessary for managing the disease. Those obligations can already be too much for an adult to handle. A parent bears a large portion of such obligation for a young child, and Hod's life was already moving at a remarkable speed. Her alarm might go off when the majority of New York City was still asleep for years. The timetable required by morning television is nearly completely different from that of the rest of the globe. You get up before the sun comes up. Your kids are sleeping when you leave the house. While other families prepare breakfast, you make stories. Before many parents had even dropped their kids off at school, you were grinning into the cameras. For years, Hoda had found success with that routine. However, Hope's condition altered the situation. There were more things to consider now. Did she have steady blood sugar? Did she feel alright? Was she eating? Was the insulin right? What would happen if anything abruptly changed? What would happen if Hoda's daughter needed her while she was at work? A parent can be followed everywhere by those inquiries. They also started to collide with another realization that Hoda had previously been dealing with. Time was passing swiftly. Her daughters were maturing, perhaps as a result of becoming a mother later in life. She seems particularly aware of the limitations of childhood. A career in television might last for many years. A youngster can only be 6 years old once. For a little period, a kid requires assistance fastening her shoes. There are only so many bedtime stories, school mornings, and times when a little child seeks for her mother because she is still the safest person in the world. Hoda was starting to realize that every business yes could entail a no at home. For every working parent, such computation is excruciating. However, the stakes were now higher, and something else was taking place concurrently. Hoda was getting close to 60. Birthdays frequently go by like regular milestones. This one didn't. Turning 60 seems to have compelled Hoda to take a more thorough look at her life. What was it that she achieved? Nearly every fantasy she had ever had. She was now an anchor on national television. She had spent decades working for NBC. She had conducted interviews with some of the world's most well-known individuals. One of the most significant morning programs in American history has been led by her. Viewers nationwide had shown her affection, stability, and recognition. However, what she had previously achieved was not the more potent question. It was her vision for the upcoming 10 years. Because success creates its own trap, that inquiry might be unsettling. Leaving can seem nearly unreasonable after years of hard work to get to the top. Quitting something you detest is understandable to others. Walking away from failure is something they comprehend. What happens, though, if you continue to enjoy your work? What happens if you are buddies with your coworkers? When millions of people still want you to be there, what happens? What occurs when there are no technical issues? However, you have a gut feeling that it's time. Hoda finally came to that crossroads. It wasn't just fatigue either. Television wasn't the only thing. It has to do with identity. Hodaki used her job as a reporter, journalist, anchor, and host to introduce herself for decades. Another identity was now more significant: mom. Hoda found herself reevaluating what it meant to be present as Hope came to terms with a disease that would need ongoing care. It took more than just loving your kids to be present. It involved being physically present, being accessible, having mornings free from television, being aware of the events at school that day, and being close enough to react when something went wrong. And maybe that's why, aside from Hoda herself, everyone was taken aback by her final choice. She appeared to be getting ready to turn down a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. She might have secretly believed that she was selecting a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, the chance to watch her daughters develop. Then September 2020 arrived. Hoda knew going into today that she was about to make a statement that would startle viewers, co-workers, and possibly entire industry. Her voice wavered, tears came next, and there was a clear sense of emotion in the studio when she finally declared that she would be leaving the show. However, the tale was far from over. In many respects, Hoda Kotb was about to make the most significant choice of her life, and the day she eventually said goodbye would turn into one of the most poignant broadcasts of the day in years. It didn't feel like a TV announcement when Hoda Kotb finally announced her departure today. It was like saying goodbye to family. Hoda sat next to Savannah Guthrie on September 26, 2024, and attempted to explain a choice that had obviously required months of thought. She has worked at NBC for more than 20 years. She had joined one of the nation's most well-known morning programs, and now she was making the decision to quit. The emotion was complex, but the words were straightforward. Hoda clarified that reaching 60 has made her consider the next phase of her life. She was at a position when she wanted to spend more time with her kids. The announcement was hard for viewers to comprehend. Today, Hoda had practically become synonymous. She had witnessed significant news events, interviews with celebrities, happy surprises, devastating tragedies, marriages, sicknesses, births, losses, and innumerable everyday mornings. Despite never having met her, people had invited her into their homes. She was now informing them that those mornings were almost over. Savannah found it difficult to control her feelings. Other co-workers followed suit, cried as well. However, the announcement was particularly potent because it was not motivated by resentment. There was no public conflict. Her career has not collapsed. Even though she was still loved, she was leaving. Sometimes it's more difficult to do that than to leave after everything has collapsed. Because leaving makes sense when life is awful. When things are going well, leaving calls for something else. Lucidity. Hoda had battled for a spot on television for decades. She now needed to summon the bravery to leave its center. Beneath the public justification lay a private reality that could no longer be disregarded. More of her was needed by her daughters. Hope, Catherine, and Haley Joy were still in their youth. Hoda had been waiting a long time to become a mother. She was familiar with the feeling of wondering if that dream would ever come true. Now that it happened, she didn't want to relive their early years, mostly through phone conversations, hurried mornings, and anecdotes shared with her after work. That urgency had been heightened by Hope's health ordeal. The typical framework of family life had altered following her hospital stay and subsequent type 1 diabetes diagnosis. Even though Hoda was surrounded by resources and support, there were new routines, obligations, and fears. Additionally, some things cannot be emotionally assigned. When a youngster is afraid, she doesn't give a damn about how important her mother's work is on television. All she wants is her mom. Hoda's priorities seemed to have changed as a result of that reality. She had been measuring possibilities and achievement for years. She was measuring it in person now. Is she going to be there for breakfast? Could she manage being dropped off at school when one of her daughters was ill? Could she be there? Could she live a family life without glancing at a clock all the time? These are common questions, but they become difficult for someone whose television routine starts before the sun rises. In the end, Hoda decided that January 10, 2025 would be her last day of regular work. The program filled with recollections as that date drew near. Old clips came back to life. Stories were told by co-workers. Messages were sent by viewers. Hoda's years of journalism, her sense of humor, her empathy, and her unusual talent for making strangers feel